Hey everybody, it's me, Tom Lommel. I am here live with you. It is 2:04 in the glorious afternoon here in California. Pro streaming tip, don't decide to update all the graphics on your site but 15 minutes before you're going to start your stream. Not a great idea. So we are here with our weekly prep stream. Talking about Storm King's Thunder. I want to make sure that of course, I always want to make sure the stream is working, right? That's always my first 2-minute check. I want to thank everybody while we're trying to catch up with chat. I want to thank everybody who showed up last night for Monday Night Dungeon Fight. That was a great time. That was an amazing session. So we really had a good time. If you missed it, it is on the YouTubes, and I've introduced some new elements to Monday Night Dungeon Fight that I think are really fun. Particularly, there is AD&D trivia now in Monday Night Dungeon Fight. So we had a little too much fun with that. I'm going to tweet out one more link here to let everybody know that we are live, and then we'll get down to business. So there we go. Done and done. All right. Thanks for sticking with me here the first 5 minutes. As always, it's a little bit of riding around in the clown car today. All right. So let's briefly recap what happened last session. Obviously, we talked about it in depth on Thursday. For those of you who are just tuning in, I do a prep session on Tuesdays at 2 p.m. Pacific. So for those of you who are planning to run your Adventurers League game on Wednesday night, you have some time to sit back, maybe listen on YouTube, or float some questions out there. Thursdays is when I really do Q&A, recap the session, and take some question and answer type of stuff in terms of either specifics about the adventure, or we talk about general GM tips and whatnot. So keep that in mind. Today is kind of an open-ended, like, let's talk about what's going to happen, and then tomorrow I'll actually run the session and report back on whether it actually worked or not. So we did a full recap last Thursday, but I do like to remind people who didn't necessarily tune in where the party left off. So essentially, they thought about going back into the Dripping Caves because there's two unexplored branches of the cavern that they have not checked out yet, and because there's two missing casks of ale which they have not recovered. And in my mind, those things are gone. Those two casks are gone. There's no getting those back. But that's just something that I've decided. That doesn't mean that that's the way it has to be. So that's actually floating out there as potential. The other thing is that after some deliberation, they finally decided we're going to go back to town, and through a series of misadventures, I guess I would describe it, kind of some blown stealth checks and whatnot, they've discovered that the town was occupied by orcs, the orc force that they had earlier ignored, and now they were faced with the task of clearing the town of orcs. So they thought it was maybe a couple orcs and a few goblins. They thought maybe the elves did a better job than they apparently did, because it ended up being more like 15 orcs and a full-strength Eye of Grumsh and a handful of goblins. So that took up the whole session. It was a giant battle royale session. It was fun. They had a good time. I had a good time. It was a very tactical type of combat. It's what one of my buddies would describe as a rolling thunder type of scenario, where you start off with some mooks, 4 goblins, take some pot shots at them, and they're like, oh, we got this, yeah, let me fire off a couple spells, and then 6 orcs show up, and you're like, oh, wow, we're getting to the meat of the encounter. And then about the time that they chew through a bunch of their resources, you send another wave at them, and that's when they really start panicking. So that's honestly, if you're looking at in terms of tips of encounter design, I really like the Rolling Thunder approach, because it's something that you can control, right? If you throw 15 orcs at them right off the top, you may have wildly misgauged the encounter, or you may have underestimated it, but you've sort of like thrown you put all your eggs in one basket, and if they can't handle it, then you really have to scramble in terms of, okay, what's the potential outcomes here? You have to either have that prepped or think on your feet, like, what if they get captured? Is it fun for 4 of the 6 members of the party to go down and 2 of them to be cornered? You're headed towards it. You're like Evel Knievel. You're headed towards that Snake Canyon jump at 130 miles an hour, and if you don't hit it just right, you could just go up in a flaming fireball crash. What I like about the Rolling Thunder type of encounter design is if you decide after the first 4 goblins and the next 6 orcs that you're not going to throw the orc boss in there, guess what? He just doesn't show up. It's fine. You just send 6 more orcs in the Eye of Grumpshaft from. That's exactly what I did. So I was able to control the difficulty of the encounter on the fly because I was introducing my villains in a step-by-step process. It also heightens the stakes of the situation where the players think, we've got this under control. They kind of size it up, and then more guys show up, and then more guys show up, and they start to clinch. So it's really, I don't know that I would rely on it all of the time, but if you're going to have a big set piece combat like this, that is definitely a winning strategy when you're sitting down to put your mind around how can I make this combat interesting, dramatic, and at the same time controllable. And in this particular case, I just threw a bunch of orcs. There wasn't a lot of variety to the encounter, but if you want to get more sophisticated, you can think to yourself, okay, well, what if wave 3 is something different? Not necessarily more powerful, but just different. What if wave 3, instead of 6 more orcs appear, 2 onkegs burrow out of the ground under the control of some sort of weird insect, goblin druid or something like that. So you can use this approach to also introduce variety into and then they're like, oh, whoa, and that was super cool when the onkegs just like burrowed out and like grabbed the dwarven fighter, and so that's, I don't know, maybe it feels like very simple encounter design, maybe it's kind of encounter design 101, but I think that it's definitely a way that you can keep things interesting, keep them entertaining, but also not have to worry about, did I misjudge this? Have I put too many things in here? Control it on the fly. Yeah, so as BSB Care points out, you could have cannon fodder wave 1. That's always a great way to start. Regular troops wave 2 and shock troops wave 3. I would consider putting shock troops as wave 2 and then have the regulars filter in behind. Like, start them off soft, then hit them really hard with a tougher monster, and if you decide, oh, they handled that way too easy, throw in your middling monster third. So it actually is kind of a weird sandwich of encounter difficulty. With the easy guys up front, then the really, then the hard guys, or the really hard guys in the middle, and then the final follow-up, or the third follow-up, or whatever, the successive wave after that, being more middle territory. Because at that point, the party has probably expended their resources, and so they're better equipped to handle a middling challenge than somebody who's going to come in and drop, some sort of like cloud kill on the battlefield, and then everybody who's got, or even like sleep. Like at that point, if somebody drops a sleep on the battlefield, then everybody's, you've got fresh enemies in, and everybody else is at 11 hit points. Like your players just, the party just drops. So keep that in mind, that it's not incremental from easiest to hardest. Actually, hardest comes next. So that's my advice. I'm gonna fidget a lot with the camera today because I did not have a good chance to. Well, I did have a good chance to set up my my streaming setup today. I just spent all my time putting these nice little heraldic emblems around my Twitter handle. So. There we go. So yes, as James V points out, it's sort of a bell curve where the heavy hitter guys are in the middle, and then you can either throttle back or add a few more regular troops. in the end. And I would say those guys don't necessarily have to be milquetoast boring, but they're going to be more dramatic just by virtue of the fact that the party's expended a bunch of resources. You might just give them a little bit of twist. You know, maybe at this point these are the guys who like have smeared blood on their faces and they have some, you know, I don't know, something different about them, right? Yeah, I'm kind of at a loss to like just immediately come up with an interesting third wave encounter that's not automatically tougher than everybody else. But maybe they're accompanied. You know, like in this one, what I did is I had them accompanied by the Eye of Grumsh, the orc shaman at that point. And that makes things interesting because you have one bad guy that the party could focus on, but that bad guy can also provide support to your regular orc troops and make their lives interesting, can bless them or drop a fairy fire on the field or spiritual weapon support from a distance, that sort of thing. So think about that kind of something that you can do with a little bit of a twist to it without being your signature encounter. So you really want your signature to kind of come in second, if you prefer. You know, thinking back on the way that I designed that encounter, I may have actually done a counter to what I just said, where I put the biggest threat, the Eye of Grumsh, in the last wave, but I didn't utilize her as the biggest threat, and that's okay. Like I don't feel like, you know, not every monster uses optimal tactics, knows the best way to do everything, is automatically omniscient as to what's happening on the battlefield, or even knows what the party's capabilities are. So I think it's okay to have excuses in your back pocket, not excuses, but justifications for why is this monster not fighting at peak efficiency. It's difficult to absolve yourself of that mindset because you watch your players week after week after week learn how they interact and learn what their optimal tactics are and keep kind of like grinding away and gilding that lily so that they become more and more optimized as the game goes on. But your monsters don't. It's an angle for them to have to do that if you have recurring villains or, you know, a thread of a campaign where they're really being studied by the big bad guy. But every new set of monsters can be fresh and not know what they're getting into and be overconfident or misjudge the situation, etc. So that's something to think about. All right, so that's the recap of the recap. Where we left off, they defeated the orcs and the Eye of Grumsh and the 4 goblins. And now we're getting back to what's going on in Nightstone. And they don't know anything about what's going on in Nightstone except for the fact that they blew the roof off the windmill, which was the signature moment of the night. And the fact that the Temple of Maliki and Lathander has essentially was set fire to at some point recently. Like it's either burning now and burned to the ground, or it's still burning and they could put it out, or whatever. You know, with a week in between, I don't really want to, you know, dive them right back into, oh, you forgot the temple's on fire and now you're screwed. It's like, I think that's just a loss. It's written off. Like I would like to get back in and go, okay, so in the intervening time, you've had a long rest or whatever and leveled up to level 4, blah, blah, blah. Here's what happened. So I think they're going to discover let's take a look. That's the recap of the recap. Let's look at our open threads in the adventure and what's going on, right? So open threads that we have, they could go back to the Dripping Caves, something to consider. They haven't explored town, so did anything happen to the guards? I'm assuming the guards are murdered, but there is an interesting opportunity there to do something with the guards. Maybe they were just captured. If you want to ease the player's consciences and not have like a very brutal, gritty, you know, you screwed up, you let the orcs go and they murdered these guys that you know, if you don't want to pound some sort of moral lesson into them with hardball tactics, the guards got captured. What happened with the elves? I think the elves looked at the situation and were like, we're not we're going to let the orcs kind of take some licks from whatever humans are left here, and then apparently those humans from the other town aren't too concerned about what's going on here. We'll go back and get some more forces and reinforcements and show up. So we have an open thread where the elves could potentially show up and say, admit your failures, why don't you just turn this land back over to us, and we will make this an outpost against orcish and goblin incursions, and you humans can go about doing what you do best, which is building huge cities and breeding with one another. So, which of course is my gross racist elven slant on what's going on with the wood elves in this particular neck of the woods. That's an open thread. They have not discovered Zolkin, potentially, or Kella Darkhope. Now, as we talked about last time, in my mind, the Kella definitely is captured. I want there to be this open thread of the Zents owe you a favor. The Zents are going to pay you back sometime, somehow. You don't know when, you don't know how, but you've got a chip in the game. Zolkin, I am on the fence about whether Zolkin actually stays, whether he's captured or whether he's dead. I think the players might find it more satisfying if he had just been straight up murdered by the goblin or the orcish attack. You know, he was overconfident and he led the rest of his Zent mercenaries in in the charge against the orcish warriors who were pouring through the wall, and he got cut down. He was really, for those of you who are just tuning in to this session or maybe the last session or so, Zolkin was really snotty to the PCs, and I've had two different groups of NPCs show up and be very snide and demeaning and dismissive of the PCs, and they couldn't really do anything about the elves. They wanted to do something about Zolkin, but they were outnumbered, and also one of the guys in the group is a Zent, which the rest of the group doesn't know. So for a variety of reasons, they just sort of were like, fine, we're going off and doing our own thing, you do your own thing. So it might be a nice emotional payoff for them if he got cut down and was dead and that was that. There is an opportunity for an RP payoff here where they free him and then they get to rub it in his face how he's not the, not the fighter that he thought he was, and, should not be in charge of this town or whatever. So it's really sort of a question of how much time do I want to allocate to this particular situation. I think the situation will play more sympathetically. So the Zent situation, right? Let's just call it that. I think the situation with the Zents will play more sympathetically if it's just Kella and Zolkin is dead. I think if Zolkin is captured but alive, they'll humiliate him. I don't know how he'll respond to that. But then I think I think the encounter starts off on the foot of being more aggressive and more hostile, where the players have the upper hand and are going to be bigger jerks to Zolkin, at which point I don't know how well he's going to respond to that. And I don't know how sympathetically Kella will be able to play the mediator of that conflict. And my main goal here is that they ally themselves with Kella. I don't really care about Zolkin. The whole potential love triangle thing that you can play with them is interesting, but I don't think it's worth exploring in any particular depth. Yeah, BSB Care makes the point that we have more of a guaranteed Zent chip if he's dead, if he's been dispatched, than if he's in the game. If he's in the game, then he may want to negotiate terms of the favor, or he may just want to kind of. See, the thing is, I don't think he'll start trash talking the PCs if they free him. I think he'll be like, oh man, he may be actually contrite and very humbled by this entire experience. But I think it's going to be a cue or an opening for the PCs to not be contrite or humble about the whole situation and be kind of braggy and snotty about it. And I don't think that leads itself to, well, okay, now you guys have been total dicks to us, but we do begrudgingly owe you a favor. The party has no expectation that the Zents owe them a favor. So if it was a situation where they're like, oh yeah, we're gonna free this guy, well, first let's talk about what we want in order to do it, which is a very Zent approach to thing. But the party is like mostly Harpers and stuff. So I think to make the offer of a favor feel more integrated and organic, and that's really my goal with, like, every time that I sit down with the book and make a decision about what types of encounters do I want to include, what things do I want to change, my number one goal is how do I make what's happening in the game and what is laid forth in the module, how do I make those two things integrated and organic? How do I take the events in the book and then drop them in, twist them, turn them, tilt them, do what I need to do, adjust them so that the players are following a natural storyline that makes sense with the stuff that they've interacted with before. So that's whenever I've been thinking a lot about, every time I sit down and do one of these prep sessions or talk about, well, what's going to happen next, I feel like it may come off as if I'm bad-mouthing the module, or I don't feel like the module is well written, or I don't like the things that are laid forth in the module. And I don't think it's poorly written. I do like a lot of the encounters, and I do appreciate the fact that it's laid out in a very modular fashion. But my job as the DM is to take the recipes out of the cookbook and adjust them to the tastes of my players, right? I always go back to DMing is like serving a meal, where I prepare a 3-course dinner, and then the players, their job is to come and be good guests at my dinner party and contribute and eat what I've laid forth, and not be like deliberate goons and just go like way off the and go like, why is there no spaghetti and meatballs? How come this is all Chinese food or whatever? Well, that's because we all agreed that it was going to be Asian night for this dinner, and it's all Asian cuisine because that's what I've decided to prepare. So I don't mean to give the impression that I'm reconfiguring these things because I think they're badly designed, or they aren't up to snuff somehow. I like to reconfigure these things because I want my players to have the best experience of the story based on their input into it and how they've experienced it. They've already like gone off the beaten path in terms of they're supposed to encounter the orcs before they go to the dripping caves and rescue the people, and they did that. I've already, like, the story that I've created with my table has been fun and interesting and engaging, and I'm fairly certain that all of my players are having a great time, but it is already in chapter 1 not reflective of the adventure as written. And I don't think that's a problem, and I don't think there's any issue with that whatsoever. So obviously every once in a while you come across errata, things that like maybe slip through editing, or the way an encounter was necessarily thought out that I'm like, I have a better take on this. Guess what? That's my job as the GM, is to try and have a better take. So that's something to something to think about. Well, so what other open threads do we have? All right. The other open threads that we have are Jorgen, aka Harshnag. Jorgen, what is he going to do? He's clearly missing his equipment, right? So he has a set of armor that's gone. His axe has been mentioned. They don't know about the armor, but his axe has been mentioned. That, where's my axe? The players may think that it's back in the Dripping Caves. That's another like hanging plot thread that I've put out there that may give them a reason to go back to the Dripping Caves. We're going to tackle that in a minute. The other thing that is a hanging thread out there, and I would encourage you guys, I haven't done this, I need to kind of sit down and do this. When you're prepping for a session, take your stack of note cards and just make one for every like open thread. What could the party follow up on that they remember? There's going to be stuff that they don't remember. They might not remember that he's missing his axe. Okay, but make a note card for each one of those things, and then that will help you decide like what are the scenes that I really need to prep, that I need to work on. Like, is this going to be a complex encounter? And what are the scenes where I can bullet point out a few things, and have just a quick set of notes on hand so that if they go there, I have made some preliminary thoughts about what's going to play out. So that's something that I need to do for my own preparation here, but I would encourage you to go, all right, like we're doing today, go through these open threads, boom, 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 what is left on the table. The other thing that's left on the table right now is the Nightstone monolith. And I don't remember who it was on Twitter or was it in chat last week that brought up, the cloud giants came and bombarded an entire village, admittedly only like 40 people, but they bombarded an entire village for a reason. And we don't know what that reason was. We just know they took this stone monolith that was covered in these inscrutable runes, and they went off somewhere. They went off into the sky. What does Jorgen, what does a giant think about that? Now, this contingency isn't really covered at all in the opening chapter, other than, well, it's just not covered in the opening chapter. I mean, the party can meet Zephyros when the cloud giant castle appears. He doesn't, to my reading, he doesn't really quiz them about it or anything like that. So there's an open thread, there's an opportunity here for some sort of scene or discovery where Jorgen sees this thing missing, and two things. Maybe he knows something about the monolith. Maybe he doesn't. Maybe he digs it up further and finds pieces of it that were left behind. Maybe he just knows about the history of Astoria and can recount like, oh yeah, this was the marker of a great battle between the dragons and the giants in the ancient days of Astoria when my kind walked the world and fought the great worms. That would be helpful for the players to know, even if they don't know the purpose of the marker or whether it had any power or anything like that. We're going to get to pacing the plot here in a few minutes, but that's something where you've got an opportunity not necessarily for the party to act on information, but to react on the new information that is introduced through an NPC who has not witnessed the events that came before. So this is honestly like a fairly clever way to get exposition out in a way that is not dry as a bone, box text, top of the module, exposition type of encounters. Because at this point, like, they've come in, they know that the stone is missing, they've seen the aftermath, they know some of the circumstances around it, they went off and did a whole bunch of other stuff, and then they come back, and the giant is like, well, what's gone on here? And can introduce information. It's a more natural way getting that bone dry detail out. Or I don't want to call it bone dry detail. It's world flavor and background that helps inform the players of what this adventure is about and what's happening in the world. But it's not them finding a scroll that's a big handout where one guy reads it and the rest of the table kind of sits around and drums their fingers while they're waiting for him to get through it, translating it or whatever it is. It's a way for them to have a role-playing encounter and interrogate an NPC who has, a finite amount of knowledge. Like Jorgen maybe knows a bunch about the history of Astoria, or maybe he doesn't know that much at all. You can kind of control, keep your foot on the accelerator of how much info you want to dump. So that's another final open thread. I don't want to talk too much about that until we get to pacing the plot. But the final part of it is when we get this stuff resolved, so either going back to the Dripping Caves, negotiating with Kella and her cohort, there's one more open thread. I'm going to have to go back and watch my own stream when we're done here. There's one more open thread, and that is Morak. So what's the role of Morak in all of this? Is he just a dude who ordered some stuff from Waterdeep and wants to get a delivery? Or is Morak part of the Zent network, I'm trying to remember the Helmstar's warehouse. So like the guy from Helmstar's warehouse that he ordered this stuff. That guy's a fence. So we talked about this last time where he cracks open the cask and there's illicit goods inside besides just ale, and he tries to rope the party into, can you help me perform this mission? And maybe, we tie that all back together where he's a Zent, Kella's a Zent, and they're there to kind of to consolidate power in the village, which could be cool too. It's maybe a little too tidy, but it definitely gives the party a strong through line to follow. And I think that's important. Like, this adventure is super sandboxy, and there tends to be a lot of go and tell so-and-so that this happened, go and get this stuff from these locations, wherever you can find it, and report back to me. And I would like to switch a few things up so that the party has a strong through line to follow. And right now I think there's two major opportunities for leaving Nightstone. One is Morak sends them on a mission, whether that is Zent-based or in the book as written, one of the side quests. The other opportunity is to follow Jorgen. And I'm a little bit concerned that that is stepping on the toes of Chapter 4, where Harshnag shows up and takes them to go see the Oracle. On the other hand, I think it could be a nice long curve where Jorgen says, you go check these things out. I need to go get my axe. And you cannot follow me where I am going right now. You will get murdered. I'm going to go get my brethren, and we are going to go get my axe. And we're going to go have some epic adventures. I will meet you in Yartar in 3 moons. I like that idea because Jorgen can give them some information, can give them some leads on places to go and reasons to go there. But he also has a great excuse to get out of the plot line and not be the 154 hit point gorilla who is dominating the combat every time, especially when they're only like level 4 or level 5. So I think those are both good options. I don't know, I may do something where Morak gives the Zent guy in the group a side quest that'll dovetail in with some of this giant investigation stuff. The other thing that I would urge you to consider as we're looking down the road here is perhaps this monolith that we have seen in Nightstone is not the only monolith, and I've brought this up before, but perhaps the reason they go to Triboar or Bryn Shander or Golden Fields is that they have a similar monolith inside their town or nearby or whatever. And I want, Jorgen says, why don't you go check? Why don't you go check and make sure that one's okay? This is just started. This all just started, and I don't know what's going on. So that's definitely an integrated organic reason for them to go to that city alongside, Morak. Oh, by the way, if you're going to Triboar, can you bring, etc. Like, you can tie those things together. They don't have to be two separate reasons to do something or existing independently. Oh, you're going up there. You know what? I have to go to Golden Fields and let somebody know, blah, blah, blah. But if you can, so that way you kind of get your side quest type of experience integrated in with maybe a stronger motivation to go check this thing out. If you do that, of course, if I do that, I'm making some work in terms of I have to decide what these monoliths are for, what they do, whether they have magical powers. Are they actually being collected by several different types of giants, or is it just the cloud giants have decided that this is a thing, or have the cloud giants decided, oh, this was just a one-off, we thought there was treasure underneath, there wasn't, it turns out we're busted, etc. So we definitely have to deal with Kella. We potentially have to deal with the caves. And then we have to figure out what Jorgen and Morak are going to do in terms of furthering the plot. I'm not a huge fan of Zephyros, the magical taxi service, just showing up to give the players a ride to wherever. Oh, you're going that way? It's been foreseen that I should help you out. I like the idea of the players earning their place alongside the giants, and I feel like them freeing Jorgen reinforces that far better than maybe a divine oracle type of anointment, if you will, right? So I think what I'm tentatively planning on right now is that Jorgen looks at the destruction that's been wrought in the village and decides something bad has happened, and he's going to track this cloud castle. And of course, let's paint him as the kind of epic hero that he's described as in the book, right? As Harshnag, which is, oh, you guys can't track a cloud castle? It's easy, And then he kind of like sniffs the winds and, maybe throws a few blades of grass in the air and then just turns. He's like, that way. So that's. I think he can lead them to it, and then the scenario that I'm kind of pondering at this point is somebody like the Cult of the Dragon, or perhaps rival cloud giants, or perhaps someone else has come and attacked that castle and absconded with the nightstone monolith, possibly destroyed the navigation orb, murdered the cloud giants who had assaulted the village. Essentially, we sort of introduced kind of like a mystery, but it's abandoned. Maybe the navigation orb is even damaged, right? The trick with the navigation orb being damaged is we can then do maybe like a quick side quest for Harshnag to recharge it, reforge it, repair it, find the MacGuffin stone that you have to place inside in order to renew control. Maybe he just has to attune to the thing, but only a giant can attune to it. And then Jorgen / Harshnag can drive them around as the magical taxi service, and it doesn't feel like it's literally out of the blue, right? Then it feels like, oh, okay, well, take this badass cloud fortress and go like get your brothers and do some stuff. So that's what I'm leaning toward in terms of the close of leaving Nightstone and the close of Chapter 1. I'm not 100% convinced that I then have to change the encounters that happen while they're on their way. The I'm a little bit worried about the dwarves and the dragons who show up, who won't be talked out of assaulting the castle. Um, the dragon might be too powerful for just Harshnag. You know, if you look in the adventure, Zephyros is a pretty potent wizard, so having him on your side is definitely like part of the encounter balance there, I think. But that doesn't mean that you can't give Harshnag some sort of edge. I don't know. It's a silver dragon. That I'm gonna have to look at that encounter and reread it and look at it in a little more depth before I've made my decision about that. The other encounter, which is like the air elemental cultists riding the, I don't remember if they're riding hippogriffs or griffins or whatever it is, or maybe they're just riding giant vultures. I mean, that's a throwback to the elemental, the season of the elemental earth or the Temple of Elemental Evil adventures. And I only have 2 players who played anything close to that. Like the other 4 guys at the table are all newbies and are not full on newbies, but they did not participate in that season. So while it's a nice callback, it might be more apt to have cultists of the dragon come and attack the castle. Oh, it's moving again? We better send another strike force. I kind of like the idea that they're still on the move, and also one of the guys at the table has already brought up like, oh, the cult of the dragon was involved in imprisoning Jorgen. I mean, Jorgen has an opportunity to get some vengeance, so that's I may tweak that to tweak the factions that are involved there, rather than doing a throwback to the cult of the howling hatred and all that kind of stuff. It would be terrific to do that at my old table where we had played that adventure together. But we've busted up the various groups in Adventurers League and kind of scrambled everything and started afresh. And I think that tie-in is going to be lost. So change it. Like I said, my job as the DM is to make this story integrated, organic, and exciting based upon what the players have played. I don't feel beholden to the book when it comes to a clever Easter egg that's been placed in, which is terrific for an entirely different set of players. So that's leaving Nightstone. All right, I want to talk for maybe 10 minutes or so here, just so we kind of like wrap up, and then we got about 15 minutes left. So I want to talk about pacing the plot. Somebody brought up so on Twitter, of course, I have been trumpeting this idea that the players have an early encounter with Harshnag. And someone on Twitter brought up the idea like, okay, well, my players are leaving Nightstone there. They've been sent by Morak on a mission to Golden Fields. And I don't really, like, I'm going to ditch the Cloud Castle conveyance. So I'm going to have them travel overland. And it's going to take 4 days or however long it is. What can I have them encounter as overland encounters to fill in kind of those 2 missing Cloud Castle encounters? And I said, well, you could have Zents shaking down a caravan on the way back. You could have the Cult of the Dragon maybe set up an ambush or something like that. You could have, a typical open road type of wilderness encounter. But you could also have Harshnag show up and either be, helping someone or investigating, like on his way to Nightstone, because he's heard that this happened and he was on his way to Waterdeep anyhow, so he wanted to check it out. And this DM's response was like, oh great, so then I can drop this info about how the Ordnung has been shattered and King Hecaton is missing and we don't know blah blah blah. Like, this is a great opportunity for expository info, and that is 100% true. However, I would caution you to, because we have an understanding of the overall plot of the adventure and kind of the key event, right? The crux upon which the entire thing turns is that the ordnung has been shattered and the king of the storm giants is missing and his wife has been murdered. Our job as DMs is to reveal information. And you may think to yourself, okay, well, look, why not get this out in the open, let people know, let the players chew on like, oh, this is the essential conflict, this is what's happening. And I would argue that for the purposes of building good dramatic structure, you do not want to do that, right? So I'm always a big fan of like comparing your session to some sort of movie or whatever, and trying to like pattern dramatic structure basically on action movies, because that's essentially what people want to play when they sit down to play D&D, is they want to play an action movie style game, although it's in a fantasy genre, right? So I would compare that to if you look at Iron Man, the first movie. Maybe as a viewer, you know that Obadiah Stane is the villain, but it's not fully revealed to you until the end of the second act, right? Until Tony has gone through the struggle of his imprisonment, his escape, and then perfecting, crafting this suit that gives him superpowers. At that point, then Obadiah Stane is revealed to the characters as the definitive villain who needs to be defeated, and things take off from there. I could go on a tangent about how I feel like the third act is rushed, but the point is you don't lay all that stuff out in the first 15 minutes of the movie. It's hinted at. If you knew nothing about the comic, it probably comes as a mild surprise or something that, definitely a reveal. Although these movies are so formulaic that it's maybe not necessarily a huge mind-blowing twist, right? That's fine. The point being, let's pace out our plot. Let's give the players room to discover these things for themselves. Let's not shovel the essential conflict down their throat in the opening chapter or towards the end of the opening chapter. We've got a lot of adventure left to play. And also, so why is that important, right? So why is it important to save it up and to dole it out? And I will say that a lot of this is based on my experience playing Out of the Abyss, where Demogorgon shows up right away. Spoiler alert he's also on the cover, so if you didn't know. Demogorgon shows up in the first chapter or two, but then there's all these side quests that take place while demons are like infecting and infiltrating the Underdark. And for me as a player, I had a real struggle with why isn't the rest of the world responding to this very powerful, very potent threat? And how can I take part in helping marshal forces against the invaders who are coming from the 666 layers of the Abyss? So for me, it was difficult to get invested in clearing a cave of a bunch of were-rats when I knew that 2 miles down the road there's giant two-headed tendril demonic demon lord working his wiles and evil charms and wreaking destruction upon the Underdark. And I think that's something that, I think that's the sort of pacing that you need to keep in mind, is if you dump that essential conflict too quickly and you make the stakes too high right off the bat, the players, number one, don't feel equipped to be able to handle it. I can't go fight that guy, but I got to do something, and then they're frustrated, right? I can't go fight that guy, but I got to do something. But in order to do something to get powerful enough to go fight that guy, this stuff doesn't feel like it matters. This stuff that I'm doing to level up, my training montage, if you will, would be skipped over in a movie or whatever, because that doesn't, it's not tied to the essential conflict. So my recommendation, and I've touched on this before, is to have the giants be as curious about this as, not quite as the player characters, but don't give them full knowledge of everything that's going on. You can have an encounter with Harshnag, and they can say, what was with the cloud giants who came down and assaulted this village? And he's like, I don't know, I just know something's very, very wrong. I'm going to have to go look into this. And like that sets the tone, like, okay, well, something big is going to play out, but it does not set a sense of urgency, and it does not seem overwhelming. If you paint the picture right off the bat that giants are rampaging across the Sword Coast, things are going crazy, attacks left and right, then you're asking yourself, well, why aren't the leaders of Waterdeep sending people out? Why aren't the Harpers more active? Why isn't there like essentially kind of like a statewide state of emergency being declared all across the Sword Coast? We know that the Forgotten Realms is dirty rife with powerful wizards. Like, make them do something. Why aren't we casting scrying spells? Etc., etc., etc. Like, there should be a 5-alarm fire of, let's get the council together and decide what we're going to do about the One Ring, is kind of what needs to happen. Or at least that's how you feel as a player. If you want to have a sense of verisimilitude, any kind of realistic framework for how these people should reasonably respond to a very dire situation, then those are the things that need to happen. So if you paint this bleak picture of this giant threat, which is apparently exploded across the Sword Coast, you're getting ahead of this. You're getting ahead of the player's capability to address the issue, and you're also denying them the opportunity to investigate and explore the issue. And you'll have a much bigger payoff in your storyline across your campaign if you can find a way for them to proactively react to information or gather information, even if it is a wandering giant who happens to come through and drop a couple facts on them. At least it's not handing them the entire backstory in one fell swoop. Let they get a chance to piece it together and then decide for themselves, like, oh, that seems like the cloud giants are kind of riled up. That's weird. Well, but, Jorgen wants to go take care of it. I bet he's going to kick their ass. Meanwhile, I'm going to go help Morag with this, deliver this cask of illicit goods that he's trying to get up the Desserin Valley and deliver to Tribawar. So that's my brief advice about pacing the plot. Give your players the chance to discover this stuff for themselves. You don't have to feed them piles of clues, but as long as the story remains consistent and at least somebody's paying attention to what the clues are, that will help. You will always have to adjust your clues and hints in response to what the players think is going on, because as they accumulate information, they're going to start to kind of like wander off the beaten path, and you either have to provide a course correction, or you have to take the idea that they came up with and make that the cool solution to what is actually going on. Do not be afraid to pick up on your players' suggestions and make that turn out like that's actually the case. Good job, guys. Players love being right. They do not like when things are predictable, but they love feeling like they've figured something out, that they have accomplished something, that they've gained insight by piecing together their little tidbits of information and come up with something cool. That could be a whole topic for a different prep stream in terms of reincorporating your player suggestions. But give them a chance to build that ladder of clues rather than having Jorgen pick them up and put them on the roof of the plot. So give them the opportunity to figure it out, and in the meantime, help them build the capability to actually address it when they figure out what the essential conflict is. That's really our time today. I have a couple minutes for Q&A if you have a question about the adventure or about something that's going on in your game. I'm happy to take that if you want to drop that in the chat. Generally, Thursdays is when I try and carve out like a dedicated 10 or 15 minute chunk to address questions. Definitely hit me up on Twitter. What Twitter do I use for all my RPG stuff? Oh, is it this thing that's surrounded by this beautiful heraldic emblem? Yeah. Pretty proud of myself. Anyway, so if you have a question in the chat, I'm happy to address it. You can just at me on Twitter, and I will address it there as well. If you're using any of the materials, please let me know. I think probably on Thursday we'll talk in a little bit more depth about what happened and what will happen in terms of determining our quest lines, how we go forward there. I've already hinted at some of that stuff, but I want to talk in a little. I want to make some more decisive choices about where we're going next. But Thursday will be the recap show. Let's play ourselves out here. I want to thank everybody for joining me. I really do appreciate you hanging out and listening to what I have to say. You know, I guess I do sort of consider myself an expert on DMing. I've got a lot of experience with it. That being said, I still do make a lot of mistakes, and there's no better way to become a better DM than to play at someone else's table and compare notes, what they're doing with what you're doing, and then also play games and play different games and learn and monitor how that works better and how it works worse. So I hope that my words give you some sort of inspiration to pick up the books and start at least a session of your own. So let's look ahead at the El Calorendo. So we are at Tuesday tonight at 8 o'clock. Tyler Rhodes is going to be streaming some video gaming with his son. Tomorrow we have Misadventure. Yeah, it is tomorrow. Tomorrow, Misadventures. If you are not playing an Adventurers League game, tomorrow night, Talene Guerra, it has started an all-ladies session of Pathfinder, although she has apparently adjusted her Pathfinder game in some very specific kind of homebrew type of ways. So that's going on Wednesday night. Thursday at 4 o'clock, I will be back with Disorganized Play, the recap show. So it will be not necessarily GM prep, but I will be retelling the vast tales of how I was dramatically unprepared, even though I run a prep show every week, and what actually happened in the session. Friday, they're doing it. Never Tell Me the Odds, our Star Wars Fantasy Flight Games Edge of the Empire game with David Crennan. Saturday, of course, is Dark Sun Dungeon World with Sean Graham. 5 o'clock is Phoenix Dawn Command. I don't think Sax is in this week. I think we have a guest. Well, Mr. Sean Graham, I think, is going to stick around and GM both of that. So you get a double dose of the King of the Garbage People. And then Sunday, you are on your own recognizance. So that is our calendar. Again, we've got Extra Life is coming up in November. We're going to be doing a special 24-hour, maybe even longer than 24-hour stream of RPG stuff. I can't remember the charity that we're supporting. I would have to look that up, but you have plenty of opportunities to pledge in, sit in, watch some different games that win one shots that we don't normally play. That's coming up in about 3 weeks. It's the first weekend in November. I will be at Gamehole Con in Madison, Wisconsin, appearing as Bill Cavalier, the Dungeon Bastard. So if you have the opportunity to go to Madison and the inclination, it's a fantastic convention. It is small, intimate, old school. Their guest lineup is insane this year. I cannot tell you what is going on. Monty Cook is going to be there along with Shauna, and I don't know if Bruce Cordell is coming or not. You're going to have a whole host of guys from Wizards there. Chris Perkins, always, he's been there every year. He's coming. Mike Merles is coming. I'm not sure if maybe Chris Lindsay or Jeremy Crawford or somebody like that is also going to be in tow. Ed Greenwood is going to be there. It's about, I want to say there's about 2,000 people who come and play, so it's on a whole different scale than something that's like a mega convention like Gen Con. Very small, very intimate. The guys who run it are really on top of it. So you have your choice. If you're going to be in the cyberspace, by all means, stick it out and join us for Extra Life. We would love to have you on board. If you are not going to be, if you're inclined to travel to Wisconsin in November, you have the chance to sit in and play essentially Monday Night Dungeon Fight, although it will not be on a Monday and it will not be at night. Some of it will. I'm going to be running a tournament of Monday Night Dungeon Fight. You can play in person with me at Gamehole Con. So that's going to be super fun. Also on Thursday, I hope to have a little preview of a brand new product from Gaming Paper. We just got the rolls in here this week. They have announced a brand new isometric grid paper that they are going to try to kickstart, I'm pretty sure. And I have got some samples of that. I'm really excited to give that a whirl and do some isometric mapping on the same kind of scale that you saw me do the Orc Battle Mat on. So that is the buzz, everybody. Also on next Monday, that's right. I don't have before proficiency check from 5 to 6. I'll be sitting in on Geek and Sundry with the Bearded Men West doing an improvised D&D show. If you have not caught that on Geek and Sundry, it's a super fun show. It's improv and D&D in a way that I guarantee you have never seen before. We try to do a complete narrative adventure within about 45 minutes, and it's a ton of fun. So that will be coming up next Monday at 5 on the GNS network. Cross-pollinating the streams, as it were. Hopefully they can cross-pollinate for us a little bit. That is the buzz. Ladies and gentlemen, gamers of all stripes and persuasions, I want to thank you for sitting in here. This has been Disorganized Play, and I'm Tom Lommel. Until next time, let's dungeon!